Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Coleman. My current role is as a technical architect for USAA with a focus on our data and analytics infrastructure and our database domain, which is more of our operational type database platforms. So we wanted to come and discuss with you today our journey migrating from IBM BigInsights Hadoop platform to Hortonworks Data Platform. Hopefully, along the way, we'll be able to give you some good pointers. This is our mission. This is at the core of what USA is about. It is at the core of everything that we do. We are member-centric, member-focused. Everything we do is with our members in mind. So, break it out into kind of three categories. We'll kind of go over what our challenges and drivers were, what brought us to this decisioning, to change platforms. And I think, if any of you know, the complexities around Hadoop, it's not an easy feat, right? And so it was a big decision for USAA. And then we'll kind of go just briefly scope of work, and then we'll go to the meat of everything is lessons learned, is where we hope to really, kind of provide some value for everyone. I don't know how many are really, familiar with IBM's BigInsights platform, but we were very early adopters. We really weren't sure what we wanted to do with this thing called Hadoop. It was starting to explode in the industry. There was a lot of value that different companies, were gaining from Hadoop. So we kind of said, all right, let's play, let's explore with this thing and see, what the art of the possible is. And so our main strategy in the beginning was, let's start bringing in a centralized repository for all of our assets across the enterprise. And this is more, our raw operational data. And let's co-locate it and make it easily accessible for our data scientists and our analysts. And so very, early on as we matured, right, and part of it was a process, some of this exploratory and research efforts that we did, we kind of felt, okay, we're ready to take it to the next level. We wanted to really push hard our Hadoop infrastructure and start leveraging it more for doing more deep learning, complex analytics, and incorporating even more data. And I guess, as you can probably expect, data management and governance and having the appropriate security model, that's got to be at the forefront as well. So some of the challenges that we started facing is that IBM during this time was also evolving, right? They were starting to become part of what was called the Open Data Platform Initiative. They were transitioning as USA was trying to transition with our Hadoop ecosystem. And I think one of the things that were at the core as we were trying to mature, evolve, and say what's next for us with our Hadoop platform, one of the main things that we were finding was that as we went out to some of these other vendors, right, and say, okay, what are we going to do about visualization on Hadoop? What are we going to do about BI? How are we going to interact with our data on Hadoop? And y'all know there's tons of vendors out there that can do just about anything on a Hadoop ecosystem. All right. I'll fix that. Sorry. So one of the most compelling, challenges that we had is that for those that aren't familiar with what GPFS is, it's general parallel file system. It's distributed file system. You can see your data no matter what node you're on. It lets you interact in a POSIX, Unix-like commands. And for that was a cool thing for us, really, because that's a familiarity for a lot of your developers and your people that are trying to consume data. It's a familiarity. And I said it before, Hadoop is complex, right? There's a lot of knobs, there's a lot of buttons, there's options. And in many cases, what you're comfortable or used to, you do differently in Hadoop. You interact with it differently. So what we were finding was, a lot of third-party vendors, we'd go to them and say, well, what Hadoop distribution are? Well, we're IBM BigInsights, and we're also running GPFS. So the explosion of, all the different software and vendors out there weren't really gearing themselves towards that, right? They were compatible with HDFS and, the typical big three Hadoop platforms, but they were not aligning themselves with IBM's technology. So I think, at where we were and where we were wanting to go, it was, I won't say it was an easy decision. It was a difficult decision for us on how we wanted to move forward, how we wanted to move our company forward, and what made the most sense for us at the time. I will say too, so early on, when we made this decision, I had no idea that they were going to partner with Hortonworks. I had no inside knowledge to that whatsoever. So this was, we did it on our own right before that happened. So in taking that holistic view, of where IBM was, right? They were also in their transition and how they were trying to evolve and get to more of that, open source platform. It's difficult, we get that. It's hard. There's a lot of bumps. There's a lot of challenges. And we took an assessment of where Hortonworks was in their stack and their versioning and also their methods for how they deliver their releases, which is important to us as well. But we took the full stack and we took a look at it and we said, okay, this is where Hortonworks at the time, and we were looking at this, was 2.5. This is where Hortonworks was, and this is where BigInsights 4.2. And I failed to mention, our version that we were on was BigInsights 3.0. And we were trying to get to 4.1, and then we said, no, maybe we should wait. You should go to 4.2. There was this back and forth on, do we upgrade? Do we wait for this? Do we wait for this fix? And this was coming a little bit later, and so there was a lot of indecisiveness, around the BigInsights versions. So, but we did know that that was the ultimate goal for IBM. They were trying to get to that 4.2, which was, they felt, a more stable state for them. And so by comparing those and what was important to us, what were the services within the Hadoop stack that we felt were the most important to us based on what we didn't have yet with BigInsights on the 3.0 version. And so we ordered them and sort of ranked them that were important to us. That was a capability that we felt was necessary to get us to that next level and where we were trying to go with our analytics. So this is oh my goodness. So this is a look at it from just the key innovations, right? If we think about how we would want to operationalize our cluster and be able to support rolling upgrades. So the transition from BigInsights to HDP, it was a forklift. There was no doubt about that. We had no option but to forklift, try to take everything that we were running there and run it in the new platform. And so when we took a look at, operationally, what would we gain with the HDP capabilities versus what we would get in 4.2 if we were to decide to take that migration path to the next version of BigInsights as opposed to completely replatforming. So these were all the focus areas that were the most important to us. And when we took a look at what we would get from a capability in the Hortonworks stack, we still came out ahead again by comparison in choosing HDP. So that is all for my portion. I'm going to start bringing up the much smarter individuals on the team. These two guys will cover our scope of work and all of the cool stuff that we had to account for, and then we'll leave time for questions afterwards.
Okay, so I'm going to move through this pretty quickly. I think we really want to get to the end where we've got the lessons learned. I think that's where you guys may get the most value out of this. But as we took a look and made that decision, okay, we're going to move to Hortonworks HDP, we took a look at the scope of work, right? Here's the scope of work, everything that we needed to do to accomplish that migration. And we found that at USAA, our data analytics group, we're kind of grouped by line of business. So we have different ETL teams that support different lines of businesses. And then we're on the platform team. And so as the platform team, as we took this scope of work out to each of those ETL teams, we got a lot of, yes, we want to do it. We want to move to Hortonworks. But we also got a lot of, I don't have the budget, I don't have resources to do all of that work. And so as the platform team, we went out, we put together a team of dedicated developers that we're going to do this migration work for each of those different groups. And this is what we tasked them with doing. So here's a couple of interesting tidbits of kind of this, again, the scope of work that we're dealing with, the number of scripts and that all needed to change because we were going from GPFS, which is a POSIX compliant file system, to now HDFS. So now every command is your HDFS, DFS, move or copy or whatever. One note on the data volume, that's 500 terabytes of data that before replication. So it was really 1.5 petabytes, right? But yeah, interesting tidbits there. And then also, this kind of just shows the time frame and the number of jobs that were scheduled in and running daily in the BigInsights environment versus the Hortonworks environment. And so you can see it obviously was not a shut it all off, move it all over, turn it all on. We definitely took it as kind of this migration approach. And so this dedicated team, they worked with each of those lines of businesses and say, okay, let's get your stuff moved over, running in a new environment, run them in parallel. And then when they were good with that, then we shut off the old environment for them. And yeah, so these are, you can see it ramping up. And then also, as we brought those projects over from the old environment to the new environment, the first thing we did was take a look at each one of them and decide, do we still need this data? Is this still valuable at USAA? Or has it kind of outlived its usefulness? And so there were some where we just retired them and we just didn't move them over. But as we brought over the ones that did migrate, it also gave those different ETL teams the opportunity to set up new projects that they knew were going to be coming in. And so everything, when we moved it over, everything was basically treated as a new, as a new project. And so it kind of gave them that chance to really ramp up the usage of the environment. And so I'm going to bring up Micah to start off with the lessons learned.
Howdy. So my name is Micah. I'm kind of like the countertops. And to point to the previous slide, lessons learned number one, you probably shouldn't do a migration over the holiday season. Migrating over Thanksgiving is not much fun. But and Christmas and New Year's, lots of stuff going on. So we broke down our stuff into 6 categories. So I'm going to be talking about security, code, and data migration, and Hive metadata migration. So a little context. So, we're a financial services company. We have a bank. We have insurance. We have all sorts of things. And so we have lots of security, like, authentication, authorization, and, audit requirements. So, we want, priority number one is be secure because, we have members and we want to protect their data. So we want to make sure that we have a good grasp on how we're handling the data. So some key differences from our BigInsights to HTTP migration. So in BigInsights, basically, we had our own custom user ID and password situation. So like basically, we were managing that whole life cycle. We were creating IDs, we were setting passwords, and that was a great thing about HTTP was how integrated it was in the Active Directory and the LDAP. So basically, now our customers, more context. So we had about 500 customers when we finally shut off BigInsights, and probably have like 600 customers now on HTTP. So we have a lot of customers with and that's a lot of user IDs and passwords to manage. So that was one great thing about HTTP was the integration into LDAP and AD. So another big difference, well, in BigInsights, we are really reliant on the operating system security. User IDs, groups, Linuxy things, just like any other Linux server. But on HTTP, we got introduced to Kerberos. And that was a learning curve for us. We had never, been exposed to Kerberos. It was new to USA. So like our security partners, they really hadn't done Kerberos before that. It was perfect timing though, because they were investigating a third-party tool to like integrate our Linux servers into Active Directory and Kerberos. So it was perfect timing, and Kerberos was a big learning curve, but that was the way to go. If you want a secure cluster, you have to have Kerberos. And then Apache Ranger. So that was one of the first things we ever talked to Hortonworks about was Apache Ranger. They sent someone down. We had like a whole day session about Ranger and all the great things it did. And looking at it, at that time it looked great. And implementing it was even better than we imagined because when we were back in BigInsights, there was a lot of processes we couldn't automate. But with Apache Ranger, it's giving us an API and a central location to do all this, authorization stuff in. And we didn't have to learn Hive security. We didn't have to learn HBase security. We didn't have to learn HDFS security. We could just learn how Ranger does it. And so we have one central location. So it lowered the learning curve on how to secure the Hadoop cluster. So that was a great thing. Everyone should use Ranger. And Knox. So another problem we ran into is all these third-party applications. Not all of them can speak Kerberos. So what do you do in that situation? Well, you have Apache Knox. So Apache Knox it's a safeguard in case you run into an application that can't do Kerberos. So basically, you can just give it a user ID and password, and Knox does the Kerberos on your behalf. So Knox is also a must. And the way we set it up, we have probably 4 Knox servers at the moment. We're setting up in HA pairs. And we're putting a glip in front of them. So, that's round robining, and if one goes down, it routes to the other one. So we put some network equipment in front of Knox to make it even more HA. So Knox is also a must. So code management, code. So one thing about BigInsights is it made Hadoop easy. The way we were doing it, it's like we were using GPFS, Spectrum Scale, I think this is what they rebranded it to. So, just a POSIX compliant file system, and we're using Platform Symphony. So basically, those 2 products kind of made, doing Hadoop work really just a generic Linux batch job. You didn't really have to know much Hadoop because, IBM was hiding the complexity from you. So as we're going to the HTTP platform, we had to migrate the biggest driver of change in our code was changing from the Hive CLI to Beeline because basically 80% of our workload in BigInsights was Hive. So that required a lot of code change when we went to the Beeline command line. So another thing we were doing in BigInsights, basically most of our Hive tables were based off just bzip2 CSV files. That was most of our tables. And it turns out that works on small scale with not much consumption, but if you want to ramp up your consumption and you want the safe space, turns out that's not going to work. So we now have access to all this ORC and Parquet and Avro file, formats of Hive tables, which is great. And one mistake we made during the transition to HTTP was we didn't set a standard. So basically, we just let them do whatever they wanted because we needed off BigInsights. We needed it to migrate. So we really didn't have a standard in place. But in hindsight, we should have encouraged them to start using the ORC format or whatever worked for their use case. We should have made them know their data and know their consumption and migrate to a better Hive table format. So that was a mistake. And now we're gonna spend this year, trying to migrate people because we didn't do it during the first migration. So another thing was, we don't really use Uzi for our job scheduling. So we really have this enterprise, job scheduling platform that everyone at USA knows about. That's how, they do .com bash jobs, so that's what we're doing in Hadoop. So it really doesn't have the concept of like Kerberos. It's just running a script. So as a result of that, each application team had to manage their own Kerberos tickets. And it turns out that was a big deal. And I think in the end, over the hundreds of apps we have, they ended up with like 5 different common scripts to do that. And so 5 scripts to create a Kerberos ticket to make sure it's not expired and to create a new one if it was expired. In reality, we probably should have created a common enterprise script to do that. And so that was a mistake that we made, was we should have had an enterprise utility to manage Kerberos tickets. And like the biggest mindset change that we had was transitioning from GPFS to HDFS. From an operations perspective, the concepts are kind of the same, but from like a development standpoint, they're completely different. And so that was a lot of code changes that had to be made for that transition. And I think, and now that we're on HDFS, using HDFS instead of GPFS, we could go to we could go to the cloud. It's a common thing, and GPFS was very specific to our install in IBM BigInsights. So that was also a big code change. So I know, and Rob talked about it a little bit earlier. So data migration. So we had about half a petabyte of storage in BigInsights, and we somehow needed to get that over to the HTTP cluster. So USA has like a leaf and spine network topology. So our BigInsights stuff was over here. Our HTTP stuff was over here in a brand new special network. And to get that from here to there, we were going to have to traverse that spine. And it turns out we weren't willing to accept that risk that we were going to affect other people. So if we were moving data from BigInsights to HTTP, I didn't want to affect USA.com traffic, because that would be a nightmare. That the network team calls me and says, "You're affecting .com. You need to stop what you're doing because I care about the members and I don't want them to have a bad experience." So what we did was we invested in network equipment to basically shortcut, not go over the spine, but have a little shortcut over to the environment. I think that was probably the fastest way because it was dedicated lines and we didn't go over the spine and affect other people. So I think that was a really good idea that we had, and I would encourage y'all to not. If y'all have the kind of same network setup, I would definitely recommend y'all not go over the big spine affect us, because there's a lot of data. And the Rob's slide, the previous slide, we did that over 6 months. So those would be like 6 months of random spikes. And I don't know what operations would have done with that. I'm sure they would have yelled at us. So another thing we did going from BigInsights to HTTP was we needed to make sure that the Hive tables returned the same data and they acted the same. So we had to have rigorous quality checks when we created the new Hive table in HTTP. So that was the bulk of the work, right? Code, there's only so many changes you need to make, but making sure that your data showed up in the right format, that was a big deal. And we invested a lot of time in that because once the BigInsights servers, once we're migrated, we're going to shut those off and throw them in the trash. So there's no coming back, and that data was not backed up anywhere. So that's your source and only copy. So another thing we did in BigInsights, we had metadata in the folder path, which I guess it made sense at the time when they first started up BigInsights, 5 or 6 years ago. But in reality, it created bad situations because things evolve. So at some point, maybe this was non-sensitive, like this, we call them projects. But so maybe this project was like non-sensitive when it first created, but then they started putting sensitive data in it, and so the metadata changed, and that was in the path. So you either put in the effort to change the path, or you just let it slide, then all this, the metadata is not right. And so just two bad situations. Either a lot of coding changes for not really much benefit, or bad metadata. So we standardized in HTTP, so we had a very standardized folder structure, and it makes life a lot easier. And so basically they control if they want to do uniqueness, but they do it in their own little space, and we're not really involved. So it's really nice to have the metadata in an external source. And the other great thing is you can integrate that metadata into other platforms. So if I wanted to suck that metadata into some governance tool, I could, because it's just sitting in a SQL Server database. So it's really easy to ingest into other platforms. So that's all for me. I think Rob's going to come back up here, talk about some stuff.
All right, just kind of finish up with the lessons learned here, and then we'll go to Q&A. So we have a common set of scripts that we wrote, kind of wrapper scripts, right, around Scoop and some other utilities to bring data into the environment and then push data out. So those common scripts, we did have to update all of those to make use of HDFS versus the POSIX compliant GPFS. And so by doing that, we were able, that was one good thing that we had in the BigInsights environment. Most people leveraged these same set of utilities. So by having this dedicated team of developers, they were able to kind of update everybody and make sure they were all using those utilities, and just had to update those main utilities, and that kind of helped speed up that migration. As well as these utility scripts that we had, we also included some additional capabilities in them to capture some metadata and add that to what was already being captured in Atlas. We really wanted to have a better understanding of the data that was in our Hadoop environment, better than what we had in BigInsights. And so we started to augment some of the additional, some of the metadata that Atlas was already capturing, and through some of our own attributes in there. We also came up with a standard asset kind of request form. We kind of added a whole bunch more metadata to that form as well, and that way, as people were able to submit those requests to create this new asset for us, we were able to build a lot of automation directly off those forms. And so it kind of helped to speed up that process of deploying these new assets to the environment. Data governance, information management was a big deal for us. We really wanted to get a better handle on that in this new environment. And so we went out to our information governance teams and brought in those data stewards to really help them understand the data that was going to be in the new environment, and make sure that they were aware of what that was. With the stakeholder buy-in, what really helped with that is really having that, going out and setting up that dedicated team of developers. They were able to basically touch most of the lines of business's scripts. It was an option. There were a few areas that chose to do it on their own. One of the things they gained by doing it on their own is they gained that experience working with the Hortonworks environment. The teams that leveraged our dedicated team, right, they were a little behind. And so what we did to help with that is we partnered with Hortonworks, brought them in, and they helped us with training for all of these different line of business teams to help kind of get them up to speed. They weren't necessarily doing the migration work, but they were going to be on tap to support everything that had been migrated by that dedicated team. So there was a lot of knowledge transfer that happened there as well. And then finally, for operational maturity, again, we took the opportunity to improve our monitoring processes that we had in the new Hortonworks environment. In the old environment, something crashed, something didn't work. It was like, well, it's Hadoop. Lower your expectations, right? Just don't worry about it. But in the Hortonworks environment, we really tried to, okay, let's improve upon that. We can't say that forever, right? So we got to really improve on our monitoring capabilities around that. So we were able to tie into Embari APIs, which really helped us to get some of those additional alerts and get them to populate into the enterprise monitoring tools that other teams were using. We also introduced a code repository for the developers, and so really formalized our dev test prod code migration process, right? So for all of these assets. And so if you want to make a change, you can't go do it in prod like you used to. BigInsights, you could. But that also introduced lots of problems. And so now we kind of formalized that. But we also gave it up to the developers to be able to deploy whenever they want to. So we were enforcing dev test prod, but at least they still had the flexibility to do that process as quickly as they needed to for some of those return to service events that may happen. And the last thing I'm going to touch on here is HA services. So Hortonworks and Hadoop, right, in general, comes with a lot of different capabilities around HA services. So you can deploy 2 name nodes, right, 2 resource managers. What we found is that the way that they implement that HA capability and the way that they behave when one of them crashes was kind of different between the different services, between Ranger, Atlas, name node, resource manager. So when it comes to deploying the HA services, we definitely say do it, right? Deploy sets so that you have that redundancy and that failover. But you got to test it. You got to test those HA services and make sure that they behave the way that you expect. And especially go to your main name node and shut the server down. Whether you pull the plug, whether you tell your Linux admin just type shut down now, shut it down and see how all the services behave. We found that there was latency now introduced with every HDFS command that was trying to hit the name node, because it would try the primary one every time and then go to the secondary one. And so we kind of came up with our own Etsy hosts override thing to kind of help reduce that latency. So that's basically it for lessons learned. My manager is here. We are hiring, so if you want to join us on this journey, feel free to come and talk with Madhavi up here. And I guess we'll bring up the team if there's any questions, as long as we have time for questions, right? Otherwise, we can talk with you afterwards as well. Thank you. Any questions? We got a microphone. Do you have one? So did we automate the provisioning of servers? No, it's very painful for us right now. There are some aspects that are automated, but that's kind of managed by a whole nother team, and we're really working on that relationship with them. But when we talk about assets, we used to call them projects. Now we call them assets. It's really just a subset of data that all relates to each other and has a similar folder path. That's kind of how we break that up. Does that answer your question? Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
So early on, you were doing this on the.
Okay. So the question was about this transition time period. How long did we basically prep the business and everybody that we were going to make that change? And how long did we take to convince them of that change versus the 5 or so months that it took to actually do the change? Lisa, is that something you'd want to talk to?
So I'll tell you a funny story. What I want to do, I just wanted to blow the whole thing away and let's just start all over. That's what I wanted to do. But because all of that process and procedure and unknowns and like, okay, let's start over, let's get it right, So I think we started communicating. There was the whole process of finalizing that, yes, this is going to happen. Hortonworks Data Platform is the choice. We're moving forward. I would think there was probably about 6 months worth of planning, organizing, who's on point for, I think we mentioned before, we're multiple lines of business within the company, and it felt a lot like herding cats, right? It is getting people, on board. And I think for the most part, everyone was on board, but, they all had other jobs to do as well. And this was kind of inflected You know, it wasn't like we said, you know, on this date in 2017, we're going to do this. It was that year, that point in time, we got to do this, and so nobody was really expecting it. It wasn't like we planned it, you know, for the following year. Everybody get ready. We're gonna go. We just injected it and said we got to do this. So there was probably about 6 months of planning and trying to figure out approaches and also how we were going to leverage additional resources to do that, because our other folks were busy doing other things. And I think once we set it in forward motion, it was, you know, about another 5-6 months. This was a year-long journey for us. So,
That's about what I
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
A lot of that 6 months was actually spent trying to figure out what our ingestion process would be and building
Yep.
frameworks around that ingestion
Yeah.
process.
Yeah,
So
and
that's already in place with all your governance and your metadata capture and your atlas and provenance and all that kind of stuff.
yep.
Then you could probably avoid for
Yeah, and so, you know, I made fun about, I just wanted to wipe it away and you know, start over. We did a lot of that as well. Do you really need this data? What are you doing with this data? Is it, you know, has it been deemed part of an enterprise asset? So there was a lot of that had to occur. So time's up. Is anybody, y'all can come and talk to us afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you.